All right, and welcome back to our Courage sessions here with the Texas Health Education Service. My name is Enrique Hasso, and I'm the Associate Director of the Texas Health Education Service here in Austin, Texas. Joining me today are some really great guests from Kaplan Test Prep. We're here to walk us through conquering the dreaded DAT and the dreaded MCAT for all of our dental and medical applicants out there. So before we even get started, Jessica and Petros, would you mind introducing yourselves?
Jessica, you first.
Sure, sounds good. I'm Jessica Peterson. I'm the Director of Institutional Partnerships with Kaplan, based in Texas, and work with quite a few programs across the country. So excited to be here as part of the Courage sessions and talk a little bit about MCAT and DAT.
And my name is Petros Minasi. I am a director on our MCAT team here at Kaplan, and have been an MCAT teacher for 2 decades now, which is both scary and also mind-boggling at the same time. But really, enjoy working with students, and so I continue to teach our MCAT courses while at the same time doing work with colleagues like Jessica and working on kind of ways that we can better enhance the experience for our students to get nice high MCAT scores, DAT scores. I've also taught DAT for some time, so looking forward to this session and getting a chance to get your questions answered.
Yes, we definitely have the pros here. So just as a reminder, this is a live Q&A. If you have any questions about preparing for the DAT or for the MCAT, we are very glad to address them here. I will be keeping track of your comments coming into the Texas Health Education Service page. So if you have any questions, post them up here, and I'd be glad to ask our panelists for today. This past year, in terms of everything that's been happening, test preparation and the admissions tests were not spared. About this time last year, we started seeing a lot of cancellations of MCAT test dates. The DAT also suffered similar setbacks or some delays and some shifts. And then throughout the summer, there was just so much anxiety around the MCAT and cancellations. I know there were just so many concerns from students, and those concerns have not gone down. The MCAT is a big part of your application. The DAT is a big part of your application. And so that anxiety is not misplaced, but it's definitely something that we hoped with our discussion today to kind of alleviate, because unfortunately, we are still living in that same world that we were in last year. And while things are getting better, thankfully, there are still some things that you need to keep in mind, because in a typical year, test prep is very stressful. So we've thrown on a global pandemic, we've thrown on uncertainty, and we just are here to make sure that your questions and your concerns are addressed. So we have a presentation from Petros that he's going to offer us right now. And I just want to make sure that you all realize that any questions about DAT or MCAT, please share them with us, and I will be glad to interrupt this presentation to make sure we address your questions.
And I look forward to those interruptions, and so happy that we're doing this. And really, to echo your statement, normally preparing for these exams is not just stressful, it's very stressful, right? I mean, you think about the kind of the work that you've done as a student in your undergraduate classes to get the good grades, to learn the material, and then there's this exam that you have to take that everyone's going to be taking, and everyone's being evaluated really across the same metric. And you think about these exams, especially the MCAT, which is a 7.5-hour experience. It's got a lunch break in it. I mean, talk about a long day. We don't normally take these kinds of exams, and there's such a breadth of content, a breadth of skills that are being tested on these exams in a relatively compact, short setting. I mean, it's all happening in one day. You don't take a physics midterm, a chem midterm, a biochem midterm, insert all the subjects midterm or final all on the same day. But on the MCAT, you got to take all of them. On the DAT, you got to take all of them. So yes, it's extremely stressful. And there were a lot of disruptions last year, and some of those disruptions have continued in a way, But I think what's important to keep in mind is a couple of things. I'll just kind of open with this statement that yes, there were disruptions in 2020. 2020 was the year of obviously the surprise of the pandemic, or not the, well, I guess surprise as far as how long it was going to take. And then as we learned more, we're like, okay, we're not as surprised about this. But it was really a year of kind of learning how to adapt. And I think there's actually kind of a positive light in all this, in that we were able to adapt, right? I mean, there were compromises that had to be made. There were, adjustments that had to be made. The plans that some students had kind of set in stone for years were completely thrown out the window and had to be restarted, right? So with the MCAT specifically, they shortened the exam. They offered the exam 3 times in a day, right? As opposed to one administration every day. Now it was going to be 3 administrations in a day, and there was a 6 a.m. testing window, which I don't know about you, but I don't like being up at 6 a.m. and having to think at 6 a.m. at that level. And then there was like a 6 p.m. I can't remember the exact time, but it was like a late night session for the MCAT. So imagine you taking the MCAT, super late at night, like you're not as fresh. And then there was a lunchtime session. Well, now you're tired from having lunch. So obviously there were a lot of things that weren't as planned for. But you know what? You can't plan for everything in life. And you think about a career in medicine, you think about a career in dentistry, like things aren't always going to go as perfectly planned. So if anything, there's a life lesson to be learned of how to adapt. The good news, though, is that everyone went through that. I mean, I have the luxury and the pleasure of speaking to a lot of folks like Enrique who are in medical school admissions, dental school admissions. And the one kind of common theme I heard through all of this was, yeah, everyone's going through this. So it's stressful for everyone. So that's not, that's a common multiplier across the board. So it's okay, because no one's going to turn around and say, oh, well, it's because I was stressed. Well, yeah, everyone was stressed. So we're all good. Like you're not. So there was that positivity that came into things. We get into 2021 and, the pandemic, of course, continues. There is more light at the end of the tunnel. We're seeing better days ahead for sure. But that being said, with the MCAT, there's still an adjustment that's been made. Now instead of 3 testing windows in a day, now there are 2 testing windows in a day. And the first testing window is now only at 7 or 7:30 in the morning, which isn't as bad as 6, but it's still not great, right? It's still not perfect. Then there's a 3 p.m. testing window, which means you're testing into dinner time because they have unshortened the exam. The exam is back to its traditional length. So I say all these things because it's important to recognize that, yes, it's probably the overused cliche that we're all in this together, but we are all in this together. Like everybody is experiencing the same effect of these changes, which is okay. That all being said, I think it's also important to keep in mind and to recognize that there is no compromise that you should be making to try to do your best on these exams, and really, continuing to put the time and put the effort in to make sure that you're putting yourself forward in the best light possible. Because at the end of the day, the one kind of mitigating factor when you think about these entrance exams is that they are an opportunity to actually demonstrate your future potential in not necessarily if you're going to make a good doctor or a good dentist, but if you're going to make a good medical student or a good dental student, right? Are you ready to undertake the curriculum? Because the curriculum in the professional programs is definitely a major undertaking. So to say the least, right, Enrique? And Jessica, right? It's not a small undertaking. It's a pretty big undertaking. So you think the MCAT is hard, and then you get to the boards, and it's even harder. So it doesn't get any easier. But that all being said, these are preparable exams, and I think that's also something that we oftentimes do lose sight of, that there's no such thing as not being able to be prepared for these exams, because there's a really high level of transparency as far as what is tested on these exams. And so I always kind of keep that in mind and remind students of that as we go. Enrique, you were going to say something.
Yes, thank you. I realize I should, for full transparency, I should mention that Kaplan and the JAMP program have a partnership through which Kaplan provides test prep services for the students in JAMP, and also provides some enrichment services to help JAMP students kind of prepare for the preparation of the MCAT test. So we're so thankful for that partnership, but I did feel I needed to come up front and say that we do have this established partnership with Kaplan.
We do.
Yeah, and we're definitely not here to talk up Kaplan. They are great, but ultimately we're here for your preparation for these admissions tests.
Yeah, and when I say preparation, I mean I'm these exams, the administrators of these exams explicitly state that there's an expectation that students do some type of practice, right? Whether that's grabbing some old, practice exams, whether it's reading through or rereading through content, like some kind of actual preparation. These aren't exams, and I'll say this as with my teacher hat on. These aren't exams that you can wake up one morning and say, I'm going to go take the MCAT, or I'm going to go take the DAT, right? These are exams that you do have to study for like you would a midterm or final. And yeah, for full transparency, yes, Kaplan does provide courses to prepare you for the MCAT and for the DAT, but we also provide books that are available. We provide practice, questions if students just want to get those. So when I say preparation, I mean just do something, even if it's get all the free stuff that's out there, like do something, because you don't want to be behind, because other people are definitely doing something along the way as we go. So any questions that have come through that I can take now, just before we?
Not yet, but I know a very common one that I hear from so many students. It's, and then, yeah, I won't go off on that tangent. The basic question is, I know this is a pathway I want to go down. Where do I even get started?
Yeah.
What does it look like? Yeah.
As far a pathway, or get started as far as like
beginning to prepare for the tests. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, because in a weird way, as soon as you take your first science class, right, whether you're pre-med, pre-dent, pre-vet, whatever it is, you're starting that path, right? So when you take general chemistry on day one of freshman year, you're starting down the path of getting ready for this exam. So, for anyone who's here or listening who is maybe earlier in your undergraduate education, which is good, keep it in your mindset that the material that you're seeing now isn't just going to be material that you're going to be tested on and evaluated on a midterm or a final in a 3-month, 4-month period. It's material that you're going to be revisiting in a couple of years' time. And more importantly, it's material that builds upon itself. So what you learn, and I'll use chemistry as the example, is it's an easier one. The chemistry that you learn in a general chemistry class is the basis for understanding the chemistry in an organic chemistry class, right? Organic chemistry focuses more specifically on what traditionally is known as carbon chemistry, or for chemistry of carbon-containing compounds. But all of that fundamental general chemistry is built into understanding the organic chemistry. Then you say, okay, well, OChem is this horrible thing, but then that organic chemistry is the foundation and the language that biochemistry is built around. So it is a longitudinal continuum that we oftentimes don't think about, because we think about it as a very kind of staccato, individualized, okay, I'm taking chemistry now, I'm going to get my grade, and I'm going to move on to OChem, get my grade, move on to biochem, but they're all actually connected. And then, the sciences, they really are all connected. I mean, you think about a topic like, and I'm really putting my teacher hat on right now, but like you think about a topic like oxidation and reduction, redox reactions, we oftentimes historically learn about them in a general chemistry class, but there's plenty of oxidation and reduction that happens in physics. There's plenty of oxidation and reduction that happens in biochemistry. And like newsflash, it's all actually the same thing, but it's just taught with a different angle. And oftentimes when we're learning it, we're thinking, oh, this is something different. And then you dig a little deeper, you go, no, actually it's the exact same thing, right? It's literally electrons moving from one place to the other. And that's just one example of many examples of how interconnected the sciences are. And then, Enrique, to kind of layer another layer to your question, as far as getting started, these exams, particularly the MCAT, are exams that will not reward you for merely knowing the content. They're exams that reward you for being able to apply the content and to use the content. So, as you kind of start to think about the bigger applications, the broader applications of this material, it's so important to be thinking or be, kind of forward thinking and not just thinking about, okay, let me memorize this formula. Okay, how can I manipulate this formula? How can I use this formula with another formula or this equation with another equation in order to be able to solve some new answer? So that interconnectedness of the exam or of the material really becomes a bigger part of it that we oftentimes, again, overlook because we don't think about the long term. So keep that in mind, I think is what it is. Yeah, the last thing I'll say on this, though, is you're going to learn more in your undergraduate classes than these tests are going to cover as far as scope. I've had so many conversations, and maybe conversation is an understatement for the actual kind of level of anger sometimes in the voice of my students when they would say things like, but I learned in my insert name of class that this, why aren't we covering that for the MCAT or for the DAT? And my response is, because it's not tested, right? That stuff is important to know and will help you. But when you're studying for these exams, you got to stick focused on precisely what is going to be tested. And that's the beauty of both of these exams, is that there's a very transparent sharing of information as far as what is tested. So it's not a secret. It's not like, some secret information where, we only a small group of people is going to know what will actually show up. They're very upfront about, here's what's on the exam, here's what you're responsible for. So really no excuses on our part or on your part as a test taker, but also no excuses for oversetting, because it's very easy when you're studying for these exams to maybe go into some of the harder topics that won't even be tested because your professor taught them to you in class, but they're not actually going to be tested on this exam. So important to kind of keep that in mind and think about that.
Yeah, especially when there's just so much ground to cover.
There's enough ground to cover just with the list of topics, science topics that the test requires you on. And then, then that's an infinite amount of science that's there, or what feels like an infinite amount of science that's there beyond that. So yeah, definitely use it to your advantage and just study what you need to study, because that will get you the best results at the end of the day for sure.
Yeah. We've got our first question.
Great.
I think that triggered a thought here. So the question from Christina Ingles. There are test prep companies that say that MCAT is not a content test, but rather comprehension and application tests within the backdrop of the content, which is pretty much what you just said. Yep. What do you say to that? And to what extent is the learning of the delivery methods more important or not? Yeah, so
maybe we can get some clarification on the learning of the delivery methods part of the question. That would be awesome. But yeah, that is true. We are one of those test prep companies that says exactly that, because that is not what we say. It is what the AMC says. The AMC explicitly says that the MCAT is an exam that tests you or requires you to know content, but is actually testing you on the application of that content. So here's what I'm going to do. I have actually a really cool slide. So we're going to do something maybe a little unorthodox, but that's totally fine. I'm going to jump around on these slides because I think that's probably more important. Here's the MCAT. And so I think you should all see this. Yes, right? You see the big pink screen? Perfect. So when you think about the MCAT, there are two layers to any question or to anything that you're being tested on. There's the layer of content, and that content is what you go into the test knowing. And at the same time, you're also being tested on one of these MCAT skills. So the four that are in white, these are defined by the AMC. So AMC has said these are the four MCAT skills, either scientific reason and problem solving, experimental design, science knowledge, data and statistical skills. And every single question is going to be at the intersection of at least one content area and one of these skills. And more times than not, there's like multiple content areas that are in a given question and multiple skills that you're being tested on simultaneously. So this is not an exam, and I'm telling you this as, you know, as a teacher. I'm telling you this as somebody who has like literally spent more hours analyzing this exam and working with this exam than, you know, I should probably admit. This is not an exam that you will be able to do well on simply by knowing content. And it is not an exam that you will be able to do well on simply by knowing, you know, strategy or knowing how to attack questions. It is an exam that you will only do well on if you both know the content and know how to apply the content, right? Actually be able to say, here's the information, here's how I can apply it. Let me actually, maybe this is a perfect time. So Christine, I'm so glad you asked that question. This is a perfect time, I think, to actually show a problem. So Enrique, if you're cool with that, I think this is like, right, Jessica, this is a good time to show a problem. So let me walk, what was that?
Let's do it.
Let's do it, yeah. So as I said, we're gonna do this a little bit unconventionally, which is totally fine. But let me find the problem first, because that's, you know, important in order to be able to do the problem. So here is a classic question that we're going to look at it and say, wait a minute, is it really that hard? I'm going to walk you through this because this is the thinking that you have to have in order to be successful on the exam. So number one, relatively longer question, right, in terms of the amount of words that are on the screen, which is fine. Number two, if you look at the answer choices, there are no numbers, right? There are these words of increasing, decreasing, increasing, then decreasing, or remaining the same. We say, okay, fine. So kind of get a feel for this, that this is going to be about the relationship of how one thing affects another thing. The first sentence in this question says the sodium potassium pump is an ATPase that pumps 3 sodium out of the cell and 2 potassium into the cell for each ATP that's hydrolyzed. And I'll pause this right there. I would make a 99% bet that we all already know that if you have taken general biology. And the reason I would make that bet is because the sodium potassium pump is the most commonly used example of active transport in introductory bio classes, and usually like by chapter 2, you've already covered it. And you've been told that there's 3 sodium out of the cell and 2 potassium into the cell for each ATP that's hydrolyzed. And in fact, even if you didn't already know that, if you're in that 1% that didn't remember that or didn't know that or never saw that as an example, the question just told you that information. So there's a bit of content that you probably came into the exam knowing, but they've just told you that information, which means they aren't going to reward you for knowing something that they've just told you about, right? It's like if I came up to you and I said, 2 + 2 is 4, and you go, yes, 2 + 2 is 4, give me $1 for knowing that. I'm not going to give you $1 because I just told you that information, right? It's not like you have given me any new information from that, you know, from your statement there. So this first sentence isn't actually a question. It's background information that you may or may not know. If you don't know it, now you have it, so you are expected to be able to apply it in order to be able to get the question right. You go to the second sentence, and it says cells can use the pump to help maintain cell volume. Maybe you knew that beforehand. Maybe you didn't. Doesn't matter. We all know it now. So we're all on equal footing, right? It's not like, oh, I know something special. No, everybody who's reading this question knows that information. Then you get to the actual question itself, where it says, which of the following would most likely happen to the rate of ATP consumption immediately after a cell is moved to a hypotonic environment? So here we have the word hypotonic, which they have not given us the definition of. So one of the things they're already testing us as far as content is whether or not we know what hypotonic means. So they could have asked a very simple question, which was, which of the following is the definition of hypotonic? But they didn't do that because that would be what's referred to as a recall recognition question, which is on the hierarchy of the types of critical thinking, that's low on the hierarchy. So that's like the basics, right? I see something and I can recall what that thing means. So that's like doing flashcards, right? That's just knowing the definition of a word, but not knowing how to use the word in an actual sentence, right? So it's the equivalent. So right now, we are tasked immediately with having to be able to very quickly identify what does hypotonic environment mean. So this is where you dig into your content knowledge. So this has happened from your content review and from your learning. So you say, okay, hypotonic environment, that means there's a lower solute concentration outside of the cell than there is inside of the cell. That is literally what hypotonic means, which means there's a higher concentration of water outside the cell relative to inside of the cell. So if you think about the flow of things, the water would be flowing into the cell, because we always go from areas of high concentration to low concentration. Since there's a higher concentration of water outside the cell than inside the cell, the water is going to be flowing in, right? That's what happens in a hypotonic environment. If we were in a hypertonic environment, it would be the opposite, but this is hypotonic. Literally the same thing that happens when you take a shower and your fingertips wrinkle, right? Or you go swimming and your fingertips wrinkle. It's because you are now technically in a hypotonic environment. So that's your fingers swell up is what happens, and it looks like they've wrinkled. But what we know is that since the water is going into the cell is going to swell up, right? It's going to get bigger as far as its volume is concerned because more water is flowing into it. So then we ask ourselves, well, who can help maintain the cell volume? Well, they just told that to us in the question. They told us that it was the sodium-potassium pump that can help maintain the cell volume. So we say, great. We think about the sodium-potassium pump, again, based on what they said, that it's pumping out 3 sodium and pumping 2 potassium in. And this is another area where you have to think about the content. You say, well, what do I know about ions? It doesn't matter whether it is the same type of ion. It just matters that it's the ions out versus the ions in. So it's 3 sodium out, so 3 out, 2 in. So it's a net movement of 1 ion into the environment. As you put more ions, more solutes into the environment, the hypotonic environment is going to start to get closer and closer and eventually reach a point where you are isotonic with the inside of the cell, because you're net moving things outwards. So eventually they're going to kind of even out and they're going to be in an isotonic environment. That's when they are going to be even with each other. So in order for that pumping to happen, we would have had to have ATP consumption go up. Once we get to an isotonic state, that ATP consumption can go back down again. It can go back to where it was originally. So now we're thinking, okay, we go up and we go back down. Now we've had to use our knowledge as far as solutes, our knowledge as far as hypotonic environments, but we've had to also apply the information that was just given to us and apply the information that we have in order to be able to solve this question. So if you look at the answer choices, you may be tempted to choose answer choice 3, the one that says it would increase, then it would decrease, because that looks right? I mean, I just told you we go to isotonic and that's going to go back. I mean, it's going to go back down because everybody's nice and happy. But this is where the MCAT takes it up another layer. They didn't ask you what eventually would happen. They asked you what immediately would happen. And what immediately would happen is it would increase. So the correct answer is in fact not answer choice 3. The correct answer is in fact going to be answer choice 1. So you talk about, and imagine you would have done all of that thinking. I mean, I walked you through it step by step by step by step just now. You would be doing all that thinking in about a minute's time. So it's also not just about knowing the content. It's also not just about being able to apply the content. It's also about being able to execute the content in the amount of time that you have to execute all the questions on the test, and then do that for 8 hours. So there's, or 7.5 hours. There's an endurance factor that comes into play as well. So it's a lot of steps is what it is as you're kind of going through it. But yes, I mean, content's going to be a huge part of your kind of prep. I mean, it's going to be a huge part of your preparation, but it is in no way going to be sufficient at the end of the day to get things
We have a question specific to that question that you just went over.
Yeah.
If you wouldn't mind doing a little content retrieval.
Yeah.
If it was moved to a hypotonic solution, wouldn't that lower the concentration outside the cell?
No, if the cell was moved to a hypotonic environment, that means the environment is already hypotonic relative to the cell, right? Hypotenacity, hypertenacity, isotenacity are all relative. It's always a measurement of things one relative to the other. So cell is moved to an environment that is hypotonic to it, right? That would imply that the environment has a lower solute concentration than what is inside of the cell. And that if it's a lower solute concentration, that means it's a higher amount of water, higher water concentration on the outside of the cell. So then the water would flow in.
Thank you for the clarification.
No.
And I think that is a perfect example of just how important it is to really condition yourself to build up that endurance. As you mentioned, you're doing a question like that. Right now, it took us about 5 minutes to go step by step. And at the end of when somebody's moving toward test day, they want to do that in about under a minute because there are just so many other questions to go through and do that for a full day, essentially.
Yeah, exactly.
It's rough.
Over and over again. Sorry, I didn't mean to speak over you.
Yeah, because it comes down not just to intellectual endurance, but also physical endurance and being able to just stay seated for that long. Are there any tips that you can offer in terms of either the academic endurance or the physical endurance for sitting through a test that long?
Yeah, so I think a good mentality and a good philosophy to apply is a culture of no surprises. So you don't want to be surprised by anything when test day rolls around. So what that means when getting ready for these exams is a couple things, but primarily it means practicing the way that you're going to actually have to execute on test day. So I'm saying, like, lock yourself in a room, no distractions, turn off your cell phones, right? No social media, nothing. Like, phones are off, everything is off when you're taking full-length exams. That way you get yourself used to it, quite frankly, because you're never going to be able to replicate the exact environment of the testing center because you are not in the testing center. Right? You don't know what the ceilings look like. You don't know what the computers look like. You don't know what the carpets look like. But you can do as much as you can to replicate that when you're actually practicing, especially when you're taking full-length exams. But it's also about building up to it. So the worst thing that you can do, and I say this with a very, very strong conviction, like, do not do this. Do not dive into preparing for this exam by just starting to take full-length exams, because that is the worst thing that you can do for yourself. One, quite frankly, you're just not ready for it on day one, right? You got to build up to it. So, first it starts with a couple of questions, then it gets to, a couple of passages together, and then it gets to just a section, and then you build up to a couple sections, and then you build up to the full-length exam. So it takes time. This is not an overnight process by any means. Plan about 4 to 5 months to make this work. Plan for about 300 to 350 total hours in terms of that. But as far as like the physical side of things, these are some basics, but they're just so important. Like proper nutrition, proper sleep habits, right? I know it's hard sometimes, especially when you're stressing out about this exam, but you got to make sure that you're well rested. You got to make sure that you're well nourished. You got to make sure that you are like literally practicing sitting for long periods of time. You even want to practice what you're going to be doing during your breaks. You want to be practicing how you're going to be managing kind of those little rest periods during a section. Top tip for you, it's no fun to be staring at a computer screen for 8 hours in a day as intently as you're going to be when you're taking this exam. I'm in front of my computer all the time right now because, of course, we are living in a world of Zoom meetings right, a virtual world. So like we're all kind of used to it, but I'm not sitting in front of my computer all day taking, questions or doing questions. I'm having meetings. I'm in meetings like this, right? Like it's like and we all are. But when you get to, this exam, you're like intently focused on the screen, trying to read question and analyze it and do all those things. So you gotta build in ways to just like take breaks even while you're taking the test, and little things like close your eyes and look away from the screen for 5 seconds. Just, little things like that. There's a study that was done a while back about how often we blink when we're looking at computer screens. And we actually blink less in a minute's time than we normally would. So it's gonna sound really weird, but just force yourself to blink, like literally, because your eyes are going to dry out if you're, like anything else. And, stretch your legs and stretch your arms and just, kind of keep yourself moving, because you are going to be kind of stuck on this computer in front of it very intently. And take the breaks. They give you breaks. I've heard horror stories where students say, oh, you know what? I was feeling good after the first section. I was on a roll. My mind was really warmed up. So I just skipped the break and I took the second section. And I think, Enrique, your reaction is priceless on that one, because you know where the story goes. By the end of the second section, or towards the middle of the second section, they were exhausted and thinking to themselves, I really should have taken that break. And then the lunch break comes along and you just never really recover, is what it comes down to. So yeah, it's so easy sometimes to feel like, yeah, I'm good. Like I'm just going to keep going. And then you realize I shouldn't have done that. Like that was silly. So take the breaks. Use that to your advantage as you're kind of going through it. From an academic perspective, like anything else, that we've been saying here today, practice is key. And that also includes, when you're studying and when you're maybe just doing more straight content review or content practice, you want to try to be always in that mindset of how you're going to be actually performing on testing. The first thing I learned in college, I took a psych class, and it was literally day one, and professor said students who study for their exams in the room that the exam is going to be offered tend to do better. And the night before the midterm, everybody was in that lecture hall studying for the exam, because we'd all listened to the professor's advice, and it worked out just fine. So that's the bit there.
Yeah, you hit on a lot of great notes, and I'm actually taking notes here for myself as well. I know that we have a few kind of myths that we want to go over.
Yeah.
And I think as we go over these, we hear so many of these on a daily basis with working with students, message boards, Reddit threads, other podcasts. We hear so many of these. These myths are really pervasive. And in my time with working with JAM students and walking them through their MCAT test preparation, I heard so many of these. And I think that that first one's probably going to be a doozy that has been fueled pretty heavily this past year. So I'm excited to kind of get through these Mythbusters.
Yeah, for sure. And we'll be able to skip a few because we've gone through some of these things already. But I think and this isn't one of the myths, this is a reality. The reality is you're here and you're at this session and you're going to be at other sessions like these because you want to be here, right? And I think that's just kind of in general, I like to remind students that this is the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal isn't to do well in the MCAT or do well in the DAT. The ultimate goal is to be standing in a white coat ceremony. So always remind yourself of that as you're working through this material, because it can sometimes, get a little daunting. It can get a little overwhelming. And it's just so important to kind of have the longer term goal that's in mind. There's a big myth out there that these exams are weed out exams. And the reality is they aren't weed out exams. They are exams that were created specifically with the intention to see how a student would perform in the professional program. So it's not, if you don't do well in this exam, you're not getting in. No, there are other factors that go into the overall admissions decisions that an admissions committee is going to be making. Yes, for the MCAT, we do a survey every year, And yes, year after year, the medical school admissions officers say that the MCAT score is the most important admissions factor, but it's only so because it is the one factor on the application that is common to everybody, right? Everybody is being measured against the same standard. This is also true for DAT. The one thing that everybody is against same standard. Your GPA comes from different schools. Even if you're at the same school as another person, you've taken different classes with different professors. So everyone's kind of being graded on different standards there. But the MCAT score, everyone's got the same number or same metric that you're being measured against. These are what are called quantitative factors, and they will determine whether an application is going to be denied, or probably admitted, but it will never determine that the application is absolutely being admitted, right? There's no such thing as going in with a perfect MCAT score, perfect GPA, and getting admitted to med school. In fact, I had a student of mine a couple of years back who literally had a perfect GPA and got a perfect MCAT score, but that's all he had. And actually took a couple of years off and went and did some volunteer work and went and kind of got some life skills and, learned other things, and then went and applied to medical school because he didn't get in the first time, because that's literally all he had as far as his application was concerned. But then the other factors do come into play, right? So all your research, your clinical experiences, your personal statement, your life story, your interviews, letters of recommendation, how your professors view you as a student, all those things come into play for the admissions decision. But the MCAT score is kind of the one that can open the doors, because it shows the schools what your, one element of what your academic potential is. But more importantly, everyone's being compared against each other with obvious, understanding that, there are, everybody does have different, life experiences and backstories. But it's a really good indicator. Here's what I'll say. It's an important exam, and it's your job as a pre-med or as a pre-dent student to put the highest level of focus onto this exam that you can give, and then add another 10% or add another 20% to it. Like if you're like, oh, this is all I can give, great. Now give us 10% more than that, because it is going to be so important for you. The higher your score is, the easier it is to get in, right? There's less question or less doubt that comes into play as far as admissions office is concerned throughout the process. So keep that in mind. But it's in no way is it a weed out exam. I've seen plenty of students through the years who maybe haven't done as well on the MCAT or on a given section on the MCAT and still gotten to medical school and have made great doctors, right? This isn't every time I go see my doctor, he knows where I work, he knows what I do, and he always goes like, my MCAT score, I don't know how I got into med school. And I'm like, well, you're a great doctor. I keep coming back to you. So the moral story is it's not the end of the world, but at the same time, do yourself as much of a favor as you can and do as well on the exam as you can throughout it. I won't get into the weeds on this because I know we're a little short on time and this information is out there. But bottom line for the MCAT, you need bio, you need gen chem, you need orgo, you need physics, you need biochemistry. Some topics in psychology and sociology are tested on the MCAT as well. So those are like the big topics for the MCAT. For the DAT, it's bio, GChem, OChem. There's reading comprehension, quantitative reasoning, and then there's something called the perceptual ability test, which is all about shapes and seeing three-dimensional objects in a two-dimensional plane. We have great sessions and great information about this on our website. I'll send those over so we can get those, you can have access to it. But if you just go to, just Google literally like Kaplan MCAT, Kaplan DAT, there'll be a section that'll be what's on the DAT, what's on the MCAT, and then a whole slew of resources available to you. I think the thing that we've kind of touched upon here, which is part of this myth, is the importance of kind of thinking about your preparation for these exams as being an evolving process. So how you're preparing on day one for these exams is going to be different on how you're preparing on the day before the actual test. And what I mean by that is it wouldn't make sense to be doing the same kind of work early as you're going to be doing later. This is what our course does as well, and what our program does, and how we've kind of designed everything. And all the research shows that earlier on, you're going to have more targeted content review, more critical analysis mastery, and that is going to kind of diminish. But what's going to increase is your targeted practice and the application of the critical analysis, right? So you're never going to be studying less or more. You're going to always have a pretty consistent cadence of studying, but the mix of what you're studying is definitely going to change, right? So it's going to evolve as you get closer and closer to test day, and really kind of, right as you get right up to test day, you're going to have very little content that you're going to be just plainly reviewing, meaning just rereading and memorizing or looking at a flashcard and taking it from there. The second myth is that, and this is for the MCAT specifically, and it's also true somewhat for the DAT, but the MCAT has an extra layer of complexity as far as the test, and we kind of touched upon this already, and that the MCAT is primarily a science exam, and I already showed you these skills, and we talked about the question. So really just going back to what we were referencing in terms of the nature of the exam and how connected it all can be, I think is really important for you to think about this from the perspective of this exam and from the perspective of how all the different layers are kind of connected to each other as you go through. Which leads us to the third myth, and this myth of that the MCAT tests you the way that your science professors tested you. And so I think it's important to recognize the fact that you are being tested in this interconnected space. But here's more importantly what I mean by this. This is just a breakdown as far as the scores for each section. So it's 118 to 132 on each section on the MCAT, 1 to 30 on the DAT. The key though is in the titles of these sections. It's the chemical and physical foundations of biological systems. It's the biological and biochemical foundations of living systems. It's all interconnected, right? So if you look at the actual breakdown of the sections, you'll notice there's as much biochemistry in the chemical and physical foundation section as there is in the bio and biochem section, because as I mentioned earlier, it's all connected. It's all integrated with each other. And that's how this test is testing you. We had this recently happen where I got a ping from a student who was like, I think something was wrong with one of the passages, one of the practice tests I was doing, because it was a passage that was all about the circulatory system, which we learn about in a bio class, but it was labeled as chemical and physical foundations. The student was, confused, like there must be something wrong. How dare you talk about the circulatory system when talking about chemistry and physics? And my response was very simple. It was like, it's all physics, right? Because you think about the circulatory system, it's really nothing more, not trivializing the heart or anybody who's in cardiology, but the heart is a pump. And then you've got a whole bunch of tubes attached to this pump, which is just like having a mechanical pump and a whole bunch of pipes attached to it. And you've got fluid flowing through it. And as the fluid flows through it, it has different pressures, just like you have pressure in your plumbing in your house, and it has different velocities depending on the cross-sectional area of the pipe. If the pipe gets bigger, the pipe gets smaller. So bottom line is, yes, it is in the physics system, and all the questions were related to fluid dynamics. So you got to realize that, okay, this isn't how my science professors taught me. My physics professor did not teach me with an example of a heart. He taught me with an example of a mechanical pump, but it is all connected. My bio teacher taught me about the circulatory system as, a tissue and as an organ. And she wasn't talking about it in terms of what's happening as far as the actual physics and the mechanics are concerned. So, it's important to kind of keep that mindset, as you will, and as you go through these, for sure. So we already did the question, so I won't make you listen through that again. But it's important to kind of keep that connectedness with or the interconnectedness, the integration with all the sciences as you go through. That's the third myth. Up to third myth. I have three more. So are there any questions before we go to the last three?
Yeah, there is one that came up as well from Melissa. She's saying, I'm technically classified as a non-traditional student, and it's been many years since I graduated and completed my prereqs. Mm-hmm. The question would be, are the courses suitable enough to refresh content that she took many years ago, or should she invest in maybe redoing the prereqs and then doing the MCAT review course as a prep?
Nope. So Melissa, do not. So here's my take on it, and I'm open to other opinions on this one. Do not go and retake the undergraduate classes over again in anticipation of studying for the MCAT. And I will reference what I said earlier. The MCAT tests you on far more narrow of a scope than you are going to learn in these undergraduate classes. So to answer your question, yes, our course will give you the review of the content that you're going to need to know for the MCAT. Will you need to maybe dive in a little bit deeper and spend a little bit more time on some areas? Potentially, because of how long it's been since you last took those courses. But I wouldn't say it's worth your time or worth your while to go back and take those undergrad courses, unless you need to do so for the application itself. Like if it's an application enhancing play, that's a different story, but definitely not for the express purposes of the MCAT. So
I think there's another side to this question, particularly for a lot of people who maybe started their first 2 years of college at a community college, and maybe they took courses that, science for majors, but maybe they weren't necessarily geared toward somebody who's interested in the health professions. Yep. I think that advice still stands in that they have the content basis, but they may have to spend a little bit more time as they're doing the MCAT preparation. Would you say that's right?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it might be, it might be one of those cases that you kind of do a little bit of pre-studying, if that makes sense. Like, or I don't know if that as a phrase, like just kind of, okay, I'm going to be starting to study for the MCAT, let's say in 2 months, but right now I'm just going to start brushing up on some of that content. And it's not, it's part of your MCAT prep, quote unquote, but it is not a part of your official, like I'm diving into the actual MCAT preparation. So, yeah.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Kind of leads us perfectly to this next myth, actually. So that was a good question to ask. As far as should you focus on all content equally, and whether you've taken the content a long time ago or more recently, the answer is no, right? There are certain high yield topics that are going to be far more tested on the MCAT that you're going to want to make sure that you put good, smart focus on. But at the same time, everybody has different strengths and weaknesses. So, I hate it when you read, when we read these forum entries that say, I spent 20 hours studying thermodynamics. It's like, well, great. Maybe you needed to study for thermodynamics for 20 hours, right? But I don't, because I'm good at thermodynamics or whatever it might be. Here's what I'll say. Studying for the MCAT is kind of like an improvisational dance. You gotta figure out what you're going to need to do as you're going through this. Don't just assume that you're going to be studying everything equally. Don't assume that you're going to need to spend more time on even high yield topics, because maybe you're a master at those topics. Maybe you will be spending time on other areas. I will also say that it's super easy to fall into the trap of, like you see the shiny ball and you want to just run towards it. And what I mean by that is sometimes you'll do a question here and there and you'll get it wrong and you'll freak out. And I've had this happen to myself. You get obsessed with this one topic. And I had this happen to a student actually recently. It was like, I think it was like 2 or 3 days before her MCAT. And I got a panic email, which was, Petros, I've never learned alpha and beta decay. Like, can we meet for 30 minutes? Just go over this, like teach this to me. My test is coming up in a couple of days. And my response was, no, one, we can meet for 30 minutes, but no, we will not go over alpha and beta decay. And I gave my reasons. And it was very simple. It was because alpha and beta decay is a very low yield question. She just happened to see one on a practice test, not gotten it right, had the panic moment, which is totally normal to have. As I said, I've had them too, and did the right thing and reached out to me. And I was like, let's meet about something else. And she was like, okay, like I trust you. I was like, good. And ended up getting no questions about alpha and beta decay on the actual test. Like bottom line is it's very easy to have those panic moments sometimes, but you have to be your own kind of monitor and not allow yourself to fall into those traps of, oh, I need to go and study everything. So definitely, don't fall into the fear of missing out syndrome for sure. But it's it's important to kind of put the focus where the focus needs to be. There's definitely high yield topics. We identify the high yield topics very specifically, But at the same time, you need to know your strengths. You need to know your individual weaknesses. What works for one person isn't necessarily going to work for you. Some elements of it might work for you, but others may not. I mean, my own personal example, I was a biochem major. I was good as far as the chemistry. I've taken more chemistry classes than I ever care to take again in my life. But I was good as far as chem was concerned. I didn't have to take physics in college, so I was lucky. But at the same time, you know, when it came to the MCAT, that was obviously an area that I had, you know, just needed more work on. So like that was where my focus was. It was very clear, but at the same time, it's one of those cases to kind of keep in mind that you want to make sure that you're putting the right work in the right places. This fifth myth, which is that everyone needs the same one-size-fits-all exam prep, it's a myth. I mean, there's nothing that says everybody needs the exact same thing. I mean, what we've done, because we want to be able to provide the right resources for a student, like, I'll be honest with you, yes, if you sign up for a tutoring package with us, that's more time you're spending with us, which is great. But if tutoring isn't right for you, then why would we want you to have tutoring, right? This is just reality on things. So, so we've created a diverse portfolio, which ranges, quite frankly, from very small offerings of, a QBank, which is essentially just questions, up to a full boot camp experience where for 5 or 6 weeks, you're only doing MCAT from 9 in the morning until 6 o'clock at night. I mean, if that's what you want, we have that. But there's nothing that says everybody needs the same thing. And then even within the various courses that we have and programs that we have, nobody is doing the same thing. So back to this notion as far as kind of the personalization, I think it's very, very safe to say that Kaplan's the only organization of all the test preparers that actually has a truly personalized course. Others will try to say that they have it too, but our program actually is personalized based on your performance. So as you are going through the material and you're taking questions, we're actually analyzing your performance and then making recommendations on based on how you have performed on what you should be doing next. So there's a lot of analysis that's happening behind the scenes. And effectively, if you're kind of following the recommended items for you, that means you're getting the most kind of optimized experience as far as your preparation is concerned. This is a screenshot of our syllabus just to get a sense of how we lay things out. We might say, go watch this video because you need work on Pascal's principle, but Jessica, you need work on buoyancy, and Enrique, you need work on cohesion and adhesion. So we'll all go watch different things because that's what we need right now. Similarly, we have the MCAT channel, which is, so, when you look at the live instruction that's in our course, they're the core sessions that everybody takes. And then there's about 95 or so hours, 1-hour sessions of the MCAT channel, which are taught by a team of 10 teachers. I'm part of that team. And basically the way this works is that these sessions are constantly rotating as far as what's being offered. And then you're, kind of figuring out and getting recommended to go to various sessions based on where you're at. But these are live sessions that are happening, but they are focused on things like the endocrine system, or like tonight I'm teaching a session about creating an MCAT study schedule. Last week I taught sessions about carboxylic acid, so very, very specific targeted sessions that you can do the work on based on, again, what your individual needs are. We've actually have more options than these. I mean, I kind of said this earlier. We have live online courses. We have on-demand courses, so that's where you want to study more at your own pace. But we also have tutoring. We have books that you can buy. We've got a lot of stuff. So bottom line is, and it doesn't have to be from Kaplan, but bottom line is, do some kind of preparation, please, because that I cannot emphasize enough. And kind of leads us to the sixth myth, which is kind of a myth and a truth. So I kind of feel like I'm lying every time I show this one, that it's too early to start preparing. There is such a thing as starting too early to start preparing. And this is an example literally from an event. A colleague of mine just shared this with me that happened to her a couple nights ago. The student was a freshman in high school, and wanted to start preparing for the MCAT. So yes, I would say that it is too early to start preparing for the MCAT as a freshman in high school, but it is not too early to start preparing for the MCAT once you have made the decision that you want to go on to pursue career medicine. You've started your undergraduate pre-med requirements. So like, yeah, for that student, ninth grade, a little bit too early. Part of the reason for that is that, I mean, the admissions timeline is long for med school and for dental school. But remember, you're going to want to spend about 4 to 5 months preparing for this exam. So, you know, the sooner you can start, the less strained you're going to be. I've definitely seen students study for the MCAT quite successfully over the summer. That totally happens and totally works out just fine. But at the same time, it's you know, it means they have less obligations and less things to do otherwise, kind of throughout the year. So, kind of a lot to take in. But those are the 6 big myths that we have identified as far as preparing for these exams, and wanted to share with you.
Yeah, and hopefully now that we covered them here, we'll never hear any of those myths again.
That's right. At least from this group. So.
Right. Yeah. When we were going over this presentation, I'd mentioned I think I'd heard each one of those myths in some platform or from some student today alone. So thank you so much for covering all that. I think it's been really helpful to kind of see kind of the meta part of preparing for the tests. These are, as you mentioned, they're really important parts of your application because they are the quantitative aspect that really shows that you are academically prepared for these rigorous professions. You know, you're looking to become a doctor of dentistry, a doctor of medicine, or osteopathic medicine. And so it's really important for you to really put your best foot forward in your preparation. I think if we could take one takeaway from what Petros just shared right now, it's that your journey is not going to be the same as everybody else's. There's so many different options out there for you. I do want to also mention that while there are so many great resources available through Kaplan, the AAMC also offers some free test prep materials, especially if you qualify for the fee assistance program. The ADA also offers similar services for students that may be economically disadvantaged applying for the DAT. And then, of course, you have a full-on suite of services available to you from Kaplan. And any of you who you know, just Google MCAT prep anywhere, you will see that there are just a host of services available to you out there. And I think the important takeaway here is that you need to be able to identify what your needs are and the best way that you study, the best way for you to prepare and pursue that pathway. And do so in earnest, because I've worked with several students who are really excited. They pay thousands of dollars for MCAT prep and just never decide to open a book or log into a class, and that it doesn't work by osmosis that way.
It's I wish it did, but it just doesn't, right?
Right.
Yeah. There's definitely a very, very strong correlation with the amount of work and the efficiency of the work that a student is doing. So it's not just about the time, it's about the efficiency that a student is doing. So, you know, put the work in and you will see the reward, and put the work in efficiently, you'll see an even greater reward. One thing I did want to also mention, though, because you mentioned the fee assistance program from the AMC, we actually do have a tuition assistance program available. So that is for students who, you know, demonstrate need, but at the same time demonstrate good academics. So if you want to find out more about that, just literally Google Kaplan tuition assistance, and it should be the first link that pops up on your screen. So
wonderful. And now for anybody who's interested in following up or maybe learning a little bit more about Kaplan, where can they go for that?
Best places would be our website. So kaptest.com would be and then if you want MCAT, it's /MCAT. If you want DAT, it's /DAT, or you can just go to kaptest.com and type in the name of the test, and you'll be taken to the landing page for, you know, that program. We have a lot of free information on our webpage, including free study plans for 1 month, 2 month, 3 months, 6 months for students who want to study on their own, or maybe have bought our books and want to use those. So we have those available. We have a lot of articles about the admissions process in terms of interviews, personal statements, articles about preparing for the MCAT. We have articles that are specific to each section of the exam. So there's a lot of free information that's available because, we as an organization have a collective knowledge and a very kind of long history with this exam. And it would really be, very unwise of us to not share that. Like there are only so many people that you can impress in the office by, oh, look at what I know about the MCAT until it gets a little bit boring and old. So no, kidding. So anyway, we have that information available because we want everybody to have that information available. So it's all out there, and that's also true for the DAT. So definitely utilize those resources.
Excellent.
For sure.
Taking a look at the website, and we've already shared these links in the chat here. And for those of you watching this video or listening to it via our podcast, we've included the links in the descriptions. But just taking a look on here, there are some free events as well, like Q&A, Secrets to Success, their MCAT workshop, med school application review. All these are free activities, and so definitely take advantage of that. Even if you don't commit to using Kaplan, free resources from a trusted organization are really valuable right now.
Free practice test too on there. So you can take
free practice test. That's huge, huge. All right. Is there anything else that we want to share? Hopefully to encourage so many of our students to keep in with the name of a courage session. Any final words of wisdom for anybody starting on this journey or maybe preparing to take their MCAT in the next few days?
I think, so there might be a couple of you that are taking the test in the next couple of days. And depending on when you're listening and watching, maybe, you can replay this. I will say this, it is, one, thanks for having us, because it's always a pleasure to get the opportunity to work with students and share information. It's a long road and it's a tough road, but it's a very accomplishable road, right? So this is not something that is going to happen overnight. You've been working hard at it for some time, and you're going to keep working hard at it. And the medical profession, you're going to be working hard at it your whole life, right? I mean, especially we see that right now where, the medical field kind of got this extra bonus layer of difficulty added into and complexity added into their lives. So I think, in keeping with the spirit of the title of the session and the spirit of the intention of these sessions, keep the positive attitude, keep the focus on that white coat, right? That is the ultimate goal. There are going to be obstacles always. They're going to come up in life. There are going to be obstacles that are going to come up in the next couple weeks, couple months, couple years. But the ultimate goal is to be fulfilling the dream of wearing the white coat, getting the opportunity to serve your community, to serve others, to change lives. And that's what's important at the end of the day. This is an MCAT score. It's a DAT score. It is a score on an exam at a moment in your life. It is an important score because it will help get you to the next stages. But keep the bigger picture in mind always, especially on those tougher days, because there will be tough days. There'll be good days, there'll be hard days, and there'll be days that you'll want to kind of throw the flag in, right? Just say I'm done. But always remember the longer term goal that's in mind.
Excellent advice. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you both so much for your time and for your great insights. This is really valuable for so many of our students right now who may not even know where to get started. For so many students right now, they've spent a fourth of their college career in online courses, stuck at home and not being able to do much. So this hopefully has been really informative and helpful to you. As Petros said, this is going to be a difficult journey, but it's definitely going to be doable. And so just keep at it, because it will definitely be worth it in the long run for you. So on behalf of everybody here at TMDSAS, the Texas Health Education Service, and of course Kaplan Test Prep, we'd like to wish every one of you all the best of luck in the application season. And we're here to help if you have any questions along the way. So until next time, we'll see you later.